Welcome to Podcash, the portable professional development podcast from CASH alumni. CASH alumni is the fastest growing association of professionals in care, health and education, and we're happy to have you here. This is where you'll hear from specialists and experts from across our network. Here's what's coming up.
When I train full staff in a centre, they have a different language. Their professional dialogue is different because now they're talking about brain development and they're talking about this skills pedagogy that we're putting into place. So the culture becomes different, that the teachers feel more empowered because they feel like they've all learnt something new together and they're all starting at the same place. And it's more of a bonding thing, so it adds to team morale and it adds to the team building too.
Let's jump in to this week's episode.
I'm Dr Kathryn Murray. I'm from Australia and I am the founder of Future Strong Education. I'm also the creator of the BrainSet Environments Formula, which has been accepted worldwide as well. And it's a whole skills-based pedagogy that I've developed for early childhood teachers mostly. It helps teachers set up their classroom in a way that aligns the needs of children's brains to the way that the environment is set up so that learning can be happy and playful and wellbeing is increased. There's a whole lot of benefits for the BrainSet Environments Formula. And what I'm learning is that initially when I was thinking about how to develop this, it was all for early childhood educators, and it still is. But I also see the use for it in primary or elementary schools, as some people call it, as well as high schools and even in the corporate sector where people are in office spaces. So anywhere where people are really, we need to think about the environment, and that's sort of what spurs me on with my work that I do face-to-face or online all the time. So that's sort of me in a nutshell, I guess. I've sort of been in this game now for about 40 years, had a lot of experiences. I've been a classroom teacher for 25 years. I've been a university academic and now my own consultancy business for about the last 7 or so years. And here I am today with you.
It's amazing. So you summarized it a little bit, but would you be able to just tell us a little bit how you got to where you are now from the beginning? What led you into brain development?
Well, I was an early childhood teacher and worked with young children for 25 years. And in that time, of course, I experimented with what worked best in my classroom. How did the children respond? How could I help children manage their own behaviours? How could I increase oral language? How could I add resilience and confidence and independence and all those great things that every early childhood educator is looking for? How could I do that? And how could I use the environment? Well, I was really fortunate to also have many pre-service teachers come to my classroom on placement, and I was part of that structure of hosting pre-service teachers. And so I had a lot of teachers that came through my classroom. And I learned from them as much as they were learning from me because they wanted to experiment as well. And they started asking me about the classroom and how I set it up and why I set it up and why did I put that there and why did I introduce that over there. So that made me think. I really had to think about why I did it because, as an early childhood educator and anyone that's listening that's a good practitioner, you just do it. It's almost like intuition. You just do it. So when I had these pre-service teachers, I really had to think about it. And that put me on the pathway then to researching and trying to learn more. And as I started to do that, my journey fell into brain development. So I started reading a lot about the brain and trialing things in my own classroom. And then, of course, when I went into the university sector, part of your job as an academic is to research. Well, happy days for me because I already wanted to research a little bit more about the brain. So I did that and I spoke at many, many conferences as an academic, talking about early childhood development and early childhood teaching, different aspects that I was researching at the time. I had all of these pieces rolling around in my head. And one day after I'd left the university sector, one day I was sitting in a coffee shop with an article to read that my colleague had sent to me and it all just fell into place. All of these things that I had been thinking about over, by then I guess it was 35 years, all fell into place. So that's when BrainSet was born. And BrainSet, the name for BrainSet, is relevant to the brain, of course, but also the different levels of the brain. So I've developed a way to explain the brain that people seem to understand pretty easily. And the S is for the survival part of the brain in the brain stem, the bottom part of the brain. Then the E is for the emotional part of the brain, the limbic system, sort of near your ear. And the T is for the thinking part of the brain, the top part of your head, and that's the neocortex. So brain set SET was born. I started sharing that with everybody, and that was a really big thing too. Like, oh my gosh, what are people going to think? Am I either going to look like a fool or people are going to say, oh, this is good? Well, I was really lucky. People said, oh, this is good. And it's been developing and spreading across the world. And I now have 4 trainers who also train BrainSet in different parts of the world. So I'm very blessed and grateful that people have had the openness and the trust to think about setting up their classrooms in a different way that's going to support children in a holistic way. But I did have a little bit of an ulterior motive when I started becoming so interested in the brain too. And I know we touched on this in one of our other conversations, Magda and Dawn, and that was because of my own brain issues when I was a baby. When I was born 60 years ago or so, I had a head that kept swelling and swelling with blood that was going around my brain. And I was born in a little country town in Australia, and the doctors in that little country town didn't know what was happening with my brain and couldn't help me. So Mum and I were packed into an ambulance and we were rushed to the closest capital city with Dad in the car behind. And when they got to the hospital in this city, the doctors pretty much said to my parents that there is no hope for your daughter. I think I was 3 days old at that stage, and they said that there's no hope for her. And I think back and I think, what a terrible decision to have to make as a parent. You know, either leave your child and, you know, your 3-day-old baby and have it put into an institution or take it home and watch it die. Terrible thing for my parents to have to decide. But anyway, they took me home and here I am today. So it was all wrong. So I'm very fortunate. Because of that, I have had a keen interest in the brain and brain development and a keen interest in how we can support children's developing brains. And of course, my love for early childhood and everything that every early childhood teacher does is really my passion.
That's really interesting. And actually, there's loads of interesting things about what you've just said. And there's a million questions that I could ask you about your journey and on even things like identifying your skills through teaching them to other people. I think we talk a lot in our audience about how hard it is for people whose focus is the care and education of other people to think about the things that they are good at. But rather than get sidetracked by all of the things that I'm interested in asking you, from our audience's perspective, I think it would be lovely to hear a little bit more about what the BrainSet actually is. How does it work? What have you figured out? What works? Can you just tell her a little bit more about the BrainSet in general? What is this magic thing that you've dreamed up that solves some of these problems?
Well, good question, Dawn. And how long have we got? So, you know, it's BrainSet has many layers, and it really is learning about the needs of children's brains, but it's also about looking at how can we make children feel safe and secure in our classroom environment. Now, our mantra in BrainSet is a calm brain is a thinking brain, and that applies to all of us because we all have a brain. So if we can set up the environment where we have this sense of safety, so when we're looking around and the environment seems to be safe, we're okay, nothing's going to hurt us. We're okay here. There's an entry and a clear exit should we need to escape. Everything is okay. We have that sense of safety. But then we move up into the amygdala in the limbic system, and now we have to feel safe. We need to feel loved. We need to feel valued. We need to feel wanted, but we need to feel safe as well. And feeling safe is a little different to having a sense of safety. So feeling safe could be psychologically safe, emotionally safe, you know, because really what your brain is trying to do is keep you alive. It's particularly the brain stem. It's the survival part of the brain. So it handles all of the parts of you that keep you alive. So it makes your heart pump. It makes your digestion work. It makes your lungs breathe. It makes you blink to moisturize your eyes. So that survival part of the brain and the emotional part of the brain pretty much work together. Because if we get a feeling of not being safe, you know how, you know, sometimes you just go into a place or you meet somebody and you just have a bad feeling about the place, or you say, you know, think with your gut, that sort of thing. And that's actually a direct thing because the nerves go from the amygdala down into your stomach. So when you say got a gut feeling about something, it's pretty accurate. But anyway, getting back to those two levels of the brain stem and the limbic system, when those two feeling good, so when there's a sense of safety and feeling safe, everything is calm. And so the top part of the brain then can easily function. So memory is better, communication is better, decision-making, problem-solving, collaboration, negotiation, all of those things work better. Memory is better because the brain is calm. So what happens though if things aren't quite so calm and for some reason you feel a little threatened, or someone is speaking to you with a harsh voice, or you can't actually see the way from one learning space to another and you don't know where to go and you start feeling a little anxious? Well, then those two bottom parts of the brain don't harmonize. And then we start to feel a little bit anxious. We feel a little bit under stress. So now our body produces cortisol, which is the stress hormone. And that goes up into the top part of our brain and floods the top part of our brain. And now we've got this thing called foggy brain. So now we can still function. We can still remember things. We can still talk. We can still make decisions, but it's not as easy. It's not as clear because we've got this extra cortisol rolling around in the top of our head. And we call that foggy brain. And foggy brain is when you've had this sort of conversation, a tough conversation with somebody, and they're saying things to you and you can't for the life of you think about something to say back. You can't think of an example straight up to prove your point or to explain yourself. And you walk away. And as you walk away, you think, oh, I should have said this. I should have said that. I should have said something. Well, I could have used that as an example. But at the time, you couldn't think about it because you had this foggy brain, cortisol. For children can still function, but it's very difficult for them to self-regulate, to calm themselves if they've got this cortisol rolling around, because with cortisol comes other chemicals and different things that are happening as well. What we want is endorphins and dopamine and all those happy hormones. They're the ones we want in the brain. And we do that by making sure that the brain is calm. How do we do that when we're relating it in an early childhood classroom? It's the way we situate the furniture. It's the language that we use as a teacher. It's the planning, the brain set planning that goes in behind it so that we can situate the furniture in a way that calms the brain. So, for example, I've got 3 pillars of design and they're for survival, emotions and thinking. And in those pillars is 16 design elements. And those design elements are elements that you would want to be in the classroom in multiple places and overlapping in the classroom. For example, we would have lots of small defined spaces in the room. It might be, 10 small defined spaces, and those small defined spaces might only be big enough to hold 1, 2, 3, 4 children maybe. In the block area that traditionally that's our big area, we might only have a space there for 6 children. But we have small defined spaces. Now, these small defined spaces are designed in a way that calms the brain. And the reason we have small defined spaces is because it's less threatening to children. In an adult's world, if you're sitting side by side with someone, it's pretty easy just to focus on what you're doing or to have a little conversation with the person next to you. It's not really threatening. But if you're in a big space, distraction is much easier because you're in a big space with lots of people and usually there's lots of noise. It's harder and it can be intimidating particularly if you're a little quiet child, can be intimidating for you to be talking to someone when there's a big audience or a lot of noise. And then we also have to factor in those children who are sensitive or undersensitive to their environment. So now we're thinking about balancing spaces where there's added stimulation or respite spaces where there's less stimulation. So a little corner just for you to go and recalibrate, I call it. So calm yourself down and, we know a calm brain is a thinking brain. So that's one element of brain set, having these multiple small defined spaces, but there's 16 of them. Another one might be to think of round corners. So have round mats on the floor and round placemats on the tables. And if you can, round some things. If you've got curved shelves, great. If you've got shelving units that are like traditional standard shelves with the sharp corners on the edge of them, we don't see them as being a danger. But the brain, for the first second, looks at that sharp edge and thinks, oh, potential danger. So let's try and reduce a lot of that. So if you have shelving units in your room, just turn them on an angle a little so everything isn't quite so hard and sharp and structured, I guess. But it's important too that we move our tables into the learning spaces as well. So we haven't got all of the tables in one part of the room. So that's like the real work part of the room. And the rest is for where you play. That's not the way BrainSet works. The whole environment is the learning environment. So the tables and the learning spaces are all sort of mixed in together. The whole environment is where the children actively learn through play. And that's just a couple of ways that we can make sure that the environment is set up in a way that calms the brain.
Introducing Cash Alumni Plus membership, your passport to exclusive features and professional development opportunities. You can now choose to elevate your membership experience and enjoy a host of enhanced benefits, including a brand new comprehensive library of e-learning modules and cashback discounts worth up to an average of £329 in savings per year. Expand your circle, exchange ideas, and stay ahead of industry developments with access to networking events both online and in person. Plus, with access to employment and career guidance sessions, you can confidently navigate your career path with personalised advice and job opportunities tailored just for you. Upgrade to Cash Alumni Plus membership for only £25 per year to access all these features and more. Head over to your member homepage or use the Join Us link in the show notes for this episode to find out more.
Those learning environments are really good for the brain development, but I imagine that it's also really good from an accessibility point of view. You know, children who might have sensory issues and things like that. I think sort of considering all those things, it would be really beneficial from that point of view as well. Wouldn't you agree?
One other one that I probably should mention is this thing called wayfinding. It's literally finding the way. And if you are an educator and you're listening to this, when you go back to your classroom, go down on your knees at the door as on entry into your room and just see what the children see. Because if children who have suffered trauma or have experienced trauma, and let's face it, pretty much all of us have experienced some type of trauma, they need to know where they're going. They need to have that sense of security and that sense of safety by being able to see how to get from one space to the next. And when they get into that space, not just having one way in and one way out. Children who have experienced trauma may feel trapped in that space, and that might heighten their cortisol level. And as I explained before, that's not what we want. We want to be calming the brain. So there's a lot of factors in the way we set up our environment, I should say too, where children generally gravitate to. A lot of teachers say to me, oh yeah, but we've got children that just go back to the same place over and over and over and over again. And I think to myself, and I say to them, that's fantastic, that's great. And they say, but other children need to use that space. Well, that might be true. So let's set up two spaces, because children need to go back to those spaces because they're developing those skills. And when we're developing executive functioning skills, which is in the front of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, as well as other regions of the brain, they're sort of all connected. We need to do this thing called repeat, elaborate. So children need to go and repeat their skills. They need to practice them over and over and over. And then we, as a professional, adds in something different, or we take something away from that space so that children have to problem solve and have another challenge. So they sort of move on. Also, children might be going back to that same space all the time because they're not quite sure what else there is in the room. So again, as the professional, we need to sort of work that out. And when you know your children, you can work this out. And maybe if let's say it's a block area that children are going back to over and over, maybe you say to one of the children, oh, I see that you've been building this airport for days. You're doing such a great job. I found a book about airports. Come over to the book area with me and I'll show you. And maybe we can plan a little bit more for your airport. So you take them over, you sit and you read the airport book with them, or you get the book and take it back to the block area and do some planning with them, or go and sit at the table and do some planning. So you're almost drawing the children from that place where they're going all the time to repeat, You're drawing them into other parts of the room so they can go, oh, this is actually safe over here too. Oh, actually, this is a bit interesting here too. Okay. And gradually they will move themselves out of that space. Many of us say, and I did this too when I was in the classroom, we'd say, oh, okay, it's somebody else's turn in the block area now. I'm just using the block area because that's a pretty common one. But, it's somebody else's turn now. You boys have been in there for 5 days now. So, how about we go over here and we let somebody else use the blocks today? That's what we do as teachers. It's almost like crowd control. But when we look at it through the lens of brain development, we can see why that's happening, and we can understand what's going on in that child, and we can almost draw them out and expand and extend their skills, because now we're understanding, that repeat, elaborate cycle that children need to go through. BrainSet has multiple levels. And we talk, when in the teacher training that we do, we talk about things like attachment. We talk about, relationship building, communication, conversation, that serve and return conversation that we should be having with children and our colleagues. We talk about that. We talk about the actual steps in the planning. There's a particular planning process that I've developed that aligns with brain development as well, and the way we situate the furniture. But it's much more than that. It's about the well-being too. When I first developed this, and one of the first early learning centres in Australia that I trained people in BrainSet, one of the educators came after the first training session and she said, I could not believe how calm the room is and how calm we were, meaning the adults. I couldn't believe how much time we've got now so we can talk to each other and plan things for the children, and how much time we now have to actually talk to the children, because they weren't crowd controlling anymore, because the children were engaged, and these are only little children. I think they were like 2.5 or something, because the children were more engaged, they were more focused, and everything was calmer. And that was something I didn't expect right at the beginning. I wasn't thinking about well-being. I was thinking about, children's brain development and the way we set up our environments. So that's been a nice little bonus.
That's really nice. You mentioned that a lot of the stuff that you focus on is about reducing the environment for cortisol to thrive in the body. And I suppose thinking about the different hormones and chemical reactions that happen to make us think the things we think and do the things we do. Where can people start to try and understand some of that stuff if they've never come across that before?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because now everywhere I go, I look at the environment, because the environment, it is a reflection of how you think, feel and act. Generally, when there's an issue with our teaching, it's the environment. I usually say to people in the training sessions, is it me, is it the child, or is it the environment? And 9 times out of 10, it's the environment. The environment's not set up well. So I guess to come back to your question, Dawn, about where do people start, I guess the way to start is to do some brain research and to see what these areas of the brain is, or to just think about some of the things that I've mentioned during our conversation up to this point. Just think about moving shelves and putting them on an angle, including some round things in your room, making sure that the way to different things is fairly clear. Having soft, warm furnishings in the room, because we want to add that connection, that feeling of feeling safe by having familiar things around. So we want the room to be less institutionalized and more home-like. So thinking about that too, there's some practical starters that you can start with before you do any research. I'm hoping to have a book published soon that explains more about this along with the research. And anyone who knows anything about Maslow has probably already worked out that there's quite a strong link to Maslow's hierarchy of needs with BrainSet. And in fact, I've cherry-picked a lot of the greats. We stand on the shoulders of those who've gone before us. So I've taken aspects of Montessori, Reggio Emilia approach, Steiner, the Steiner schools, taken elements of that. I've taken Vygotsky, Piaget, Maslow, Bronfenbrenner, neuroscience research, and of course my own 40 years of experience. I've put all of that into this bundle that's called BrainSet Environments Formula.
We talked a lot about the impact of BrainSet Formula on children. And I wonder what you've observed the impact was on educators who apply the formula in their settings.
Well, as I mentioned before, people have commented about how calm the classroom is now, and that has added to their well-being. But the other thing that they say is that, or what I've seen and what they've told me, is that when I train full staff, in a centre, they have a different language. They talk to each other. Their professional dialogue is different because now they're talking about brain development and they're talking about this skills pedagogy that we're putting into place. So the culture becomes different, that the teachers feel more empowered because they feel like they've all learnt something new together and they're all starting at the same place. And it's more of a bonding thing. So it adds to team morale and it adds to the team building too, because part of what I do is in the training process is literally go into people's rooms and help them move furniture around. And we do that together. And then we discuss why we've moved that to there and how just turning that on an angle is going to support the brain stem, the survival part of the brain, or how we, by designing that nice little corner over there, how we have supported the limbic system and the amygdala and all of those feelings. What are we trying to promote here? But I also get the teachers to help each other. And I also ask them to go into each other's rooms because now we've developed this culture. We're all working on something together and the language is the same and we've got this common goal as a centre. So we talk a lot about philosophy and having the same vision. And I encourage teachers to go into each other's rooms and say, oh, okay, so this is a really nice space. It looks really nice, but what's it for? What skill is being developed in this space? And I think that's the key. It's not just about making the room look nice and putting a bit of furniture on a few angles and having a few round mats and things like that. It's much more than that. It's a skills-based pedagogy. What skill are you wanting to develop for these children? It's all about the children. So for the teachers, once that's sort of in place, they feel like they're working together. They feel like it's more of a team effort, and it is. And the dialogue is different. The way teachers talk to each other is now different because everybody's on the same pathway. Everybody has the same vision. And of course, not everybody in a centre embraces it at the same level. Some people just really fall in love with it and can't wait to get into their room. Some people are a little bit more hesitant. Some people find it a little daunting to have change when they feel like things are working okay the way they are. And I understand that totally. But all I ask is for people to be open-minded and think, well, what if we looked at things a little differently? What if we moved the rooms around? What if we did our planning a little differently? What might be the outcome? What have we got to lose? Let's try it. And together we try it, because after the training, I don't just drop you off and go, there you go, get on with it. It's an ongoing coaching after that as well. So I'm there to support the whole way until people are feeling really comfortable in their brain set approach. Everyone's different. So, I work on an individual basis. Even though I might train the whole team, I still work on an individual basis because we go into each classroom environment because they're individual and they're different and they've got different children, slightly different needs. So we work contextually as well. It's not just a one-size-fits-all.
That sounds great. I think I can imagine how it could feel intimidating to someone working in a traditional classroom, because I think with a lot of this stuff, it sounds lovely, but the more you learn, the more you realise how much there is to do. I think that's the bit where you go, oh, actually, there's loads of this. I'm never going to manage to get there. This is really actually quite scary. Just going to go back and try and make the best of what I've got. So how do you overcome that feeling of overwhelm for practitioners?
I support them by just starting off small. We just change a couple of things in the room. So it might just be, maybe we just move the tables on an angle. Maybe we just move a couple of tables and move them on an angle. And let's see how that goes. Let's just, settle in with that first and see how the children use the room. And I always tell people when we do make these changes that we need to, it's like when you move into a new house and you have to settle into the house. And then you see, oh, I've put the saucepans in the wrong cupboard in the kitchen. They need to go down here near the oven. You have a little change around because once you live in it, it's a little different. And so that's what we do in the classroom too. We might do some changes, but then I say, try it and see how the children respond. Talk to the children about the changes that have been made. Talk to the children about what you can do in these different small spaces now, and everybody ease into it. But the other thing I wanted to say is I've got this saying called small, significant changes. So it might just be, as I said, just tip the tables on an angle. It might be reducing the size of the block area and having 2 block areas. That might be it. That's it. That's all we do. And then you see how that works. And then we might make a few more changes. Now, when I do the trainings with people, often it's when we go in to start moving rooms around and things like that, the children aren't there, or the children are all out being taken outside and being supervised by somebody. And it's not the way that I advocate that teachers would be doing this in an ongoing way. Teachers should really only change a couple of things at a time so that children, like you're just saying, Dawn, children don't get overwhelmed and children don't come in and go, wow, what happened? Because it can really throw children if you just do a big overhaul. So we don't want to do that. We want to just do a couple of areas at a time when teachers are doing it themselves. Sometimes I have no choice when I'm working in centres. I'm there for a certain period of time and, we have to make this makeover. Some teachers want a whole makeover. Some teachers just want a couple of changes. And either way, after we've done those changes and we come back together and we talk about the changes, and sometimes the children have had a chance to experience the changes too, then we talk about it. I can say with pretty much, I guess I can't say 100%. Let me just say 98% success rate with teachers saying that, wow, they can't believe the difference just those few changes have made. They can't believe how settled and calm the children are, because now teachers are thinking differently. Now they're placing things in a way that calms the brain because of the training that we do. So it makes a big difference. But as far as people being overwhelmed and like, oh gosh, I don't want to be doing this, it works perfectly fine, thank you very much, I totally understand that. Change is hard. So we just do these small but significant, little by little. And as I say, we work individually. Some people are ready to go full out and some people just want to have small steps, and that's okay. We work with everybody individually. It's not that I do these changes and walk away and think, well, up to you now. There's always ongoing support and coaching. People can email me and send me photos and say, what should I do here? And what do you think about this? I'm very accessible when we're supporting teams in different early learning centres across the world.
This is Podcash, brought to you by Cash Alumni. For job search and careers advice in care, health and education, why not try our state-of-the-art SkillsMiner AI tool? SkillsMiner is under the Careers tab of cashalumni.org.uk. That's cashalumni.org.uk.
How does the formula adapt to the needs of older children? Because we actually talked a lot about children probably in the early years, but I wonder how it would differ for much older children.
Yeah, that's a good question. And it all links to brain development. So around 7 or 8, I'm going to give you a quick little neuroscience lesson. So brief, but quick. So as children develop this, they've got this stuff called myelin that's developing in the brain that's helping to connect different synapses and deepen neural pathways and do all that sort of stuff. So in the training, we talk more about that. But just for the purpose of this conversation, let's just say we know that already. When children develop a little more as they get older, obviously their brain matures. And when children are about 7 or 8, they have enough myelin in their brain, so enough connectors, I guess, holding everything together so that they can experience empathy. Children have difficulty with that when they're younger than 7 because they just don't have the brain maturity. They need this myelination. They need this myelin in the brain to be able to deal with other people's perspectives and understand other people's points of view. And that only happens really when children are about 7 or 8. That's when children can effectively start working in groups. And I know teachers like children to work in groups a lot earlier, particularly in grade 1 when they move into more formal sort of teaching or structures. Group work sort of happens, but really children can only cope with that when they end up with this area where they can empathize when they're 7 or 8 years of age. So because the brain changes, we still need to have a lot of the elements that we would utilize in the early childhood classroom, but it's on a different scale. So we would still have small defined spaces, but the small defined spaces now are 2 desks together or 4 desks facing each other, but with something in between. So that's like two children and then two children, but they could be facing each other, but maybe a row of plants in between them, so that they're still together, but they're still separate. So there's smaller defined spaces. And we would still have the nice couch in a primary classroom so that children have got a space to go. We'd still have a little sensory corner, another respite space where children can go, just one child at a time, or two children. So we would still have small defined spaces in the room, but in a different way. And it would look a little different to the early childhood classroom. The other thing I want to say is when children are progressing from an early childhood classroom, so I'm going to say childcare just for the sake of everybody who's listening understanding, when they're progressing from there into grade 1, really for that first term, they should be able to utilize that same play-based learning program that they were doing in their early childhood classroom in the first term, like first 3, even the first 6 months is even better if you can, because those children are transitioning. Just because it's turned into the new year, it doesn't mean that their brain is suddenly switched on. So now they've suddenly got empathy and they can suddenly work in groups and they can suddenly cope with the demands of a more formalized classroom. So it needs to be a transitional approach as children, because children are all of all different ages when they go into grade 1. They're not all born on the same day. They're not all the same age or the same maturity. So we need to have this transitional approach, in my view, to support the brain, and then learning happens easier. I have this concept of mine is naturalistic learning and naturalistic assessment. So if we structure the room in a way that children are naturally learning, we can naturally see what they're doing. We can see that they've got one-to-one county correspondence. We can see that they can write their name or not. We can see that they can, match colours and do some patterning because we've set up the learning environment in a way that we just observe that. It's just natural. And getting back now to the older children, having these smaller defined spaces, so it's a little more structured, but we still need to cater to the needs of the brain. We all still have a brain stem, we still have a limbic system, and we still have a neocortex. That hasn't changed. Just how we set up the room changes from the early childhood to the primary or elementary, depending on the part of the world that you're in. Similarly with high school, same thing. We've still all got a brain. So high school again is different, but we still need to set it up. Then we move further on to the corporate offices. And if there's a lot of people in a corporate office space, we need to think about that too, because guess what? They've got a brain too with the same needs. Remember I said before that the environment speaks, and how we think, feel and act is dictated by the environment. So whatever the environment we're in, we need to have a brain set lens. We need to have a brain set approach, in my opinion.
This is great. There's loads of stuff that you've talked about today that calls back to some of the other episodes that we've recorded with other experts talking about related but different things. So the last episode that we recorded with Cheryl Warren about neurodivergence and how noisy classrooms can really make people struggle with learning. We recorded a podcast with Oxford University about the brain story and everyone's brain being different and thinking about like brain scaffolding and things like that. So how can practitioners really understand their skill set and why the things that they're doing are working the way that they're working, and keep that focus on the good stuff?
I think when people start to make these small but significant changes that I spoke about, they see that the success, they see that the children are more settled, more engaged, oral language increases, behaviour issues decrease, collaboration, communication increases, problem solving, decision making, all of that sort of stuff increases. And I think the teachers see that. And they know they're the ones who actually move those tables. So they're the ones who actually, curated each of those spaces. So I think that they can see their own success in that way. But I totally agree with you, Dawn. As teachers, and I think as human beings, we often don't look back and see how far we've come and congratulate ourselves for the journey and for the ride with the mistakes and with the good things, because that's part of our own growth and our own journey. And that's something that I talk about in the professional development sessions that I do with teachers too, with the ongoing coaching aspect of it. We look back. Where were we when we first started? Remember when we first met, how was your classroom operating then? Remember the things you said to me then? Now tell me what's happening now, so that they can actually see that they have been the instigators of these changes. And I want to touch on something about the neurodiverse when you mentioned Cheryl Warren. With BrainSet, with the planning and what we talk about during the training, we learn that when we carefully curate each of these spaces, so we carefully plan the spaces. It's not just, oh, we'll put the puzzles over there, and oh, we'll put the art over there, and we'll put out a few paintbrushes and a bit of paint. It's not the spaces that we're talking about. We're talking about carefully thought through, planned spaces that are going to add to children's skills. So we put open-ended materials in there in a way that whatever your ability level is, you're going to be successful. So if you're a gifted child in some area and you go into the literacy space where you've got all of these literacy materials, pens and pencils and books, and by the way, there should be books and pencils and paper in every space, but there's one designated for literacy. Let's say the gifted child goes in there and the gifted child draws a drawing and then writes a whole paragraph about their drawing. So that child has experienced success. Maybe the child that has some sort of intellectual challenge, they might go to that space and they'll get the paper and they might flick through some books and then just do some scribbles on the paper. They've experienced success. And the child that's middle of the road, they go in and they might write their name and draw a picture, and they've experienced success. So no matter what the ability level is, we want children to experience success. We want them to fall in love with learning. And then I go back to the environment. The environment is really how we can create all of that. So if we set up our learning spaces and the environment in a really effective BrainSet way, they're just going to learn because we've set it up in a way that you don't even have to be there. But of course you want to be there because you want to have these deep, rich, facilitating conversations. So the teachers become the facilitator more than the teacher. And of course, we still have the traditional teaching approaches that we've always done. We still have the children on the carpet and read a story and do some music and do some games, because that's all related to auditory processing as well. So we still need to do all of those wonderful teaching practices that we all do anyway, because everyone does a good job in early childhood, I believe, to the level of ability and understanding that they have. With BrainSet, we just add to that. We just expand a little on what you already know and give you different options of success.
Is the BrainSet formula something that could translate outside of the classroom, outside of the education settings?
The concepts that we're talking about inside the classroom also apply to the playground, also apply to outside. So even though outside we need those big gross motor spaces for running and, swinging and climbing and all of those sorts of things, we still do need some small defined spaces for children to go to, so that for all of the reasons that I've said earlier. So the same sort of concepts apply outside as they do inside. It just looks a little different. Now, linking that to home is a similar thing. So if parents can think about the way that they position the furniture in their home environment, are things all straight and hard? Are there lots of sharp corners? Because for a child, those sharp corners are right at eye level, mostly. For an adult, it's a whole different perspective. So how are we putting things in our spaces? Do we give children sheets and blankets and things so that they can make themselves a cubby house and they can keep the cubby house up and have this psychologically contained space that's okay to keep it up and leave it up? Is there a space, can they climb under their bed and make a whole little space, or in a closet or a cupboard somewhere? Is there, a space that they can go into so it's just their own little space so they can feel psychologically contained, so that their brain can be calm, so they can feel familiar and comfortable, and so that they can think and just create, because we want creative, imaginative individuals as they grow up to be adults. So we want them to be able to function and think clearly. That helps parents as well, because now the children have got things to do, and we want to develop that creativity. So I'd much rather see children have a stack of sheets and blankets rather than, an iPad or something like that. And let's get them off the screens and let's get them creating and being imaginative. That's another thing that for any parents that are listening, if your child says to you, "I'm bored," that is music to your ears. That's the best thing that they can say, because now they've realized, oh, I need to find something to do. And as the parent, don't find something to do for them. Say, well, what could you do? We've got something outside that you could do. You've got your bike outside, or we've got those big stack of sheets over there. You could do something with them, let them create, let them use their own imagination. As the adult, we don't always have to find the solutions. In fact, we already know how to find the solutions. We have to give children the opportunity to find their own solutions. And that's part of life.
That's amazing. I love sort of that emphasis on creativity and letting children use their imagination to find something to do. I have quite a big question for you, and that is, how do you see the future of brain development, and what would you like it to be in, say, 5-10 years' time?
My vision for the future is that across the world we have BrainSet centres, we have BrainSet schools. My big vision is for me to have a BrainSet head office, home base. I have 4 trainers at the moment across the world. I'm hoping to expand on that as well. So I have more trainers delivering BrainSet in their local areas and spreading the love and spreading the word and doing the best we all can for children, because, really that's what we're all here for. We're just trying to do the best we can for children so that they can grow up and be happy, productive, healthy adults. And there's a whole range of reasons that that's really important for the economy and for, our future human race and humanity. So if we can develop children that are comfortable and happy with themselves and have all of these confidence, creativity, resilience, all of these wonderful human skills, that we think, I'll die a happy woman.
Is there anything that you haven't had a chance to talk about?
Well, there's a massive amount of that I'd still like to say. If anyone wants to contact me, you can do it through the BrainSet website, or you do it through Future Strong Education. We have a contact us spot on both of those, futurestrongeducation.com or brainsetformula.com.
Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast.
Thanks for listening to Podcash. If you enjoyed it, please follow or subscribe on your podcast app so you never miss an episode. You can also watch many of these conversations by heading over to cashalumni.org.uk and going to the CPD and Best Practice section of the site. That's cashalumni.org.uk.